Death is such a dirty trick. It appears to be something that in the end it's not at all. But boy, is it convincing. What death really is a horizon line. What death really is just as far as we can see. If we could see further, we would know that the crossing of the horizon means nothing. A horizon is just a limit of what you can see. If we were raised up higher, we could see further. Far enough that we could say, oh my goodness, I see. There she is. There he is. All is well. But that horizon feels like an unending separation. We need to remember that death is not the opposite of life. And that is true for a very simple reason. Life has no opposite. There is nothing that's opposite of life. Life conquers all. Life is what reigns in heaven. Nothing can snuff out life. So while it is true that we are all gathered here tonight survivors of the losses that we have endured, we're not the only survivors. So are our loved ones, because they survived death. Because death is just a horizon. They made it. They survived. They went through the transition, and all is well. Pope John Paul talked about this in words that maybe are helpful for us to hear. He said, you've got to understand, when God makes a life, it's for eternity. There's no expiration date on that life. It's for forever. Death is not the opposite of life. Life has no opposite. Death is simply a horizon line. So why does it feel so unbelievably hard? In talking to people who have suffered losses, I have heard some incredible descriptions of how they feel, and I am so grateful for them sharing how they feel with me, and I want to share some of that with you. One person told me that going through their grief was like recovering from frostbite. At first, you're numb. You can't feel anything. And then you start to feel the prickles and the pins and needles. And before you know it, it burns. Someone else who lost someone very suddenly said, I feel like my life was like a puzzle, and all the pieces fit. And when he died, the puzzle got turned upside down, and the pieces went everywhere. So now I have to start over again, putting the pieces back together. But I'm realizing now that in the trauma of what happened, some of the pieces are missing. Some of them I'm not going to get back. And I have to figure out how to make this puzzle without all the pieces. That's what death feels like to us. So how are we going to survive this? How do we keep moving forward? I don't have easy answers, but I can tell you what I hear when I talk to wise people who have had terrible losses, but somehow still have a lightness about them. And here's some of what they tell me. You don't get over it. Don't believe people who say that you're going to get over it. That's not true. But here's what is true. You can move beyond it. You may not get over it, but you can move to a new place so that you still carry it, you still have it, but you don't carry it the same way that you did. It doesn't feel the same way that it did. In a way, the feeling of loss might even be deeper, because the longer we live, the more we realize how special that person was. The more we recognize all the gifts that are showing up in our life at all the different stages of our life. But we can move into a place where we're not always in the burning of the frostbite. We can recognize that there are pieces of our puzzle that are not going to come back, so we find something else to go there. Or we leave it empty. We leave it empty because that's what feels right to do. One of the things that's so frustrating about grief is how much work it is. And a lot of us know that we're going through work, but what makes it so frustrating is you wouldn't mind it so much if it were a steady climb out of the valley of death, right? If it were a steady climb so that you eventually got to a little bit of a higher place, and then you could see and you go, oh yeah, this is okay. But that's not how grief works. Grief is a lot more like gardening. Grief is like when you till the soil of your garden and you get all the rocks out. Here in Ravina, it's all clay. So you work, you sweat, and you toil, and you work to get all those rocks out of the clay. And then another season goes by, the earth shifts, and you go back and all the rocks are there again. That's how grief really is. Just when you think you're done tilling it, you're going to have smooth, clear soil. No, the rocks keep shifting. They keep coming up. You keep finding all these rocks. And then you find yourself one day saying, where did I get this wheelbarrow full of rocks? I thought I cleared them all out. But that's not how grief works. You don't clear them all out. They come in stages. The important thing that we need to do is what we heard in that beautiful second reading today. We need to choose hope. Because hope is what does not disappoint us, says St. Paul. We need to choose hope. Because nothing makes me sadder when I'm talking to someone who's lost someone than when I hear them saying over and over again, I hope God's being good to them. I hope they believed enough. I hope they loved enough. I hope they were a good enough person. I hope they pleased God. I hope God's not punishing them. That's the one that hurts me the most. Because grief is already hard enough. It's already hard enough to live with the separation. But to also live with the fear of not trusting God to be good to us, that's too much burden for us to bear. We have to let go of that. We have to have hope. We have to have trust. That's why we gather here. The God who would become a human and then die and break his body apart for us, to be able to take him inside of us and be fueled from the inside out, that God is not going to be cruel. There's no reason to ascribe cruelty to God. Hope does not disappoint, which is a great promise from a saint who says, if you trust in God, I promise you won't be disappointed. Trust in God is never wasted. Love for God, never wasted. I know a woman who tells me that the way she survives her terrible loss is every morning when she wakes up, she says to herself, the worst is over. The worst is over. And she said, in some days, it's really bad. But the next day I say to myself, the worst is over. And she said, saying it and trusting in God is making it true. Little bit by little bit, I see myself moving. But of course, she's going to be tilling that garden and the rocks are going to be there. So let us remember that our loved ones, they've gone beyond a horizon. That Jesus came here to gather everyone to himself and promised that he would lose nothing that the Father gave him to tend. And we are who God gave to tend. So let us strengthen our trust and resolve. Because after all, if you're here tonight, you are a survivor.